Good, thank you, Diana. So, well, welcome everyone. Before we get started, we want to make an announcement about language availability for this workshop. So to do that, we have Ms. Diana Orozco, who is serving to provide our bilingual interpretation in Spanish language during this workshop. So Diana, please, thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody that's joining this meeting. Today we will have simultaneous interpretation from English to Spanish. Please note that the translation globe will not appear, the one that is shown on your screen, until after I have read through the all language instructions. Therefore, we are asking that everyone joining us for this event, please select your preferred language to facilitate hearing presenters and participants clearly and to prevent technical glitches or interference occurring between the two language channels when one is not selected. In other words, regardless if you're an English-speaking audience, you will have to select the English in order to be able to hear the simultaneous interpretation if a question is asked in Spanish. If you're on your laptop, please locate the icon after I provided the instructions that is shaped like a globe at the bottom of your screen. Click on the language interpretation and then select English. If you're on an iPad or a smartphone or a similar device, then locate the three-dot menu on the right corner of your screen. And then you will click on interpretation options and you will select Spanish. Thank you. Buenas tardes a todos. Gracias por unirse a esta reunión el día de hoy. El día de hoy contaremos con interpretación simultánea al español. Después de que haya proporcionado las instrucciones, va a aparecer en la parte inferior de su pantalla un globo como el que aparece en la pantalla que dice Interpretation. Va a seleccionar esa opción y luego va a seleccionar Spanish, es decir, español. Una vez que lo haya hecho, ya va a poder entrar al canal en español. Si se ha unido usando un iPad o un teléfono inteligente, en lugar del globo va a haber 3 puntos en la parte inferior de su pantalla, del teléfono o iPad, y ahí va a seleccionarlo y luego va a seleccionar la opción de Interpretation y posteriormente va a seleccionar Spanish. Nuevamente, esta es por si quiere escuchar la interpretación simultánea. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Thank you, Diana. Appreciate that. Thank you all. And just a couple other logistical items before we officially begin the welcoming remarks here. We'll have a few ways for you to be able to provide input and share comments here today. One of those is through the Zoom chat feature, which I imagine many of you are familiar with. We really value using that tool to provide your comments and questions to us today. It's a great way to hear from a lot of people kind of at once, and we can all see and view and hear from each other together collectively, and we're able to save it and download it here through the Zoom tool. So definitely encourage that as well. But we also will make sure when we open up for question and answer and discussion with you, the Zoom raise hand feature helps indicate that you'd like to speak over audio, which we're happy to do, and we'll be able to make sure the mute controls are flexible so that you can come off mute and talk, ask questions, and provide your comments in that way for anybody who prefers. And by the way, so again, for those of you who might be on a smartphone here, these are the settings on a smartphone setting for you as well. So with that, I want to, again, thank you all for being here. And my name is Andy Pendoli. I'm serving as workshop facilitator here, supporting the County Land Use and Environment Group and the Regional Decarbonization Framework team in facilitating a series of workshops we're calling the sector workshops, and that we've been conducting for weekly here through April into early May. And these are a series of workshops focused specifically on sectors within this framework of regional decarbonization. And today we are focused on the land use and natural climate solutions. I see some familiar faces. I know some of you joined us last week for kind of the energy sector focus, and we have a couple more coming up in subsequent weeks, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. So I do want to let you know today will be a pretty focused, technically oriented conversation workshop, if you will, focused on land use and natural climate solutions. So that'll be our focus today. If you have more specific ideas and thoughts about, again, back on the energy sector, like we talked about last week, buildings, transportation, and jobs, those topics, those latter three topics are coming up in upcoming sector workshops, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, in a little while to explain to you. So, so with that, I want to go ahead, and what we're going to do, our format wise, is I'm going to introduce our colleague Elise Hansen in just a moment. She's going to work through a set of slides to give you an overview of this sector topic as we have today. So appreciate y'all offering her some time and patience to be able to go through these slides in their entirety. And then from there, we'll be able to open up and hear from all of you through any comments and questions. And we have some questions to ask of you on this topic, by the way. So we're looking forward to getting your feedback in that way. So I want to thank you, and please do let us know. I do see a couple comments in the chat. If you're having any language interpret, let me just one quick thing. For those of you on the iPad page, I see your comment here. Your iPad, hopefully your iPad settings may look like this on the screen, perhaps, kind of like a smartphone. If you see the more button with 3 dots, hopefully, if you click on that, that may open up the language interpretation function for you. So I'm hoping that will work for you. If not, it may be a Zoom software version that you have. So just wanted to try and check in with you there. But otherwise, if our team members have other suggestions, they'll send you a direct message through Zoom to let you know. Okay, with that, thank you. Thank you for letting us know about that page. But for now, let's move into the presentation. Again, I want to introduce Elise Hansen, and she'll give you a more detailed self-introduction. And then from there, we'll spend some time hearing from her, and then spend the bulk of our meeting today. We'll spend the bulk of our meeting today hearing from all of you with your questions and comments. So with that, Elise, thanks for being here, and take it away.
Great, thank you, Andy. Good afternoon. I'm Elise Hansen, and I'm a management fellow in the Land Use and Environment Group, or LUJA's Executive Office. Also from the LUJA Executive Office is Murtaza Baksamusa, Program Manager of Regional Sustainability, as well as Michael De La Rosa, Rebecca Appel, and Yasmin Rissa. I'm so sorry, Yasmin, I messed up your last name. We also have Emily Leslie, who co-authored the RDF's technical report, Chapter 5, entitled Natural Climate Solutions and Other Land Use Considerations. Emily is a national expert on GIS, land use, and California energy sightings that balance energy needs with natural resource and land conservation. She is the principal at Montara Mountain Energy and has offered invaluable contributions to this project. She will be available to answer questions after this brief presentation. Before we begin discussing natural climate solutions in the decarbonization framework, we want to start by recognizing that there are communities in the San Diego region that face unjust conditions and circumstances related to the environments in which they live. The tribal nations of the San Diego region are an example of one community that has historically faced such impacts. We would like to recognize those injustices with a land acknowledgement from our team. We acknowledge the harmony that existed between land, nature, and its original peoples, who have since endured displacement, persecution, and systemic oppression. We pay our respects to the unceded territories and homelands of the 17 tribal nations in our region, the most of any county in the United States, from 4 cultural groups: the Kumeyaay, Diegueño, the Luiseño, the Cupeño, and the Kuya. As climate change increasingly threatens the region, its people, and its cultural identities, we aspire to learn from Indigenous traditional knowledge in undoing the injustices of the past. Recognizing the need for a regional approach to addressing climate change, in January last year, the Board of Supervisors voted to create a regional decarbonization framework. This framework is intended to provide science-based pathways to inform policymaking in regional, county, and city governments towards reducing greenhouse gas emissions in the San Diego region. It is separate from, but complements, ongoing climate action planning efforts by local governments. The framework is a visionary document being developed collaboratively through public-private partnerships and community input. It will provide strategies and initiatives to move forward towards zero carbon emissions in the region. There are 3 components of the integrated regional decarbonization framework. First, the technical report that was prepared by UC San Diego and some of the nation's leading experts on energy modeling. The presentation and discussion will primarily be based on this report. Second, a workforce development study by Inclusive Economics to ensure that our local workers benefit from climate investments. And third, implementation pathways. While there will be many studies, discussions, and recommendations throughout this process, actual decarbonization results will come from the implementation of policies, programs, and projects by all of us working together. To address these regional emissions, the RDF technical report modeled pathways to decarbonization for electricity, transportation, and buildings. Additionally, the report analyzed natural climate solutions and land use considerations for regional decarbonization. Here's our timeline. We are currently in the policy and program development phase, and there is an open comment period for the technical and workforce reports that is open through May 31st. From now through August, we will continue to work on the workforce development study and the implementation pathways. Finally, we intend to present the integrated regional decarbonization framework with all three of the components I described earlier to the board for approval. The final fully integrated framework is intended to help policymakers identify opportunities for collaboration across sectors and jurisdictional boundaries. We'd like to recognize some of the commenters who provided the consultants with invaluable feedback on how to improve the chapter in terms of additional and improved analyses, land use considerations, and context. We are grateful for the time that stakeholders took to provide feedback, which improved this analysis and the entire report. So this chapter focused on the carbon emissions, sequestration, and storage potential in natural and working lands in the San Diego region and the natural climate solutions available in the region. Natural and working lands, which include all agricultural lands, naturally emit and sequester or capture carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases. Most natural and working lands act as carbon sinks because they sequester more than they emit annually. This report primarily focused on carbon dioxide because that is the main greenhouse gas and is sequestered in natural and working lands. Other gases like methane and nitrous oxides are sequestered, but at a much lower rate. Similarly, natural and working lands emit other greenhouse gases like methane and nitrous oxides, but at a lower rate, and which contribute less to overall atmospheric warming when compared via carbon dioxide equivalent. This is not to say that these other greenhouse gases are not important. Rather, this chapter acknowledges that carbon dioxide is the bulk of the problem in the region, and atmospheric carbon dioxide drawdown by natural and working lands is accomplishable, and efforts to protect or enhance natural sequestration of carbon dioxide can be meaningful in the region. As previously mentioned, this chapter focused on the regional natural climate solutions available. Natural climate solutions are land management strategies and other actions in natural and working lands, as well as in urban and built environments that decrease the greenhouse gas emissions from plants and soils and or increase sequestration in plants and soils. Additionally, most natural climate solutions also increase, protect, or maintain naturally stored carbon in plants and soils. To investigate regional natural climate solutions, the chapter used the 2021 vegetation classification from SANGIS shown in this map. The San Diego region is scrub dominated. This map shows the extent of scrub and chaparral vegetation in light green, which is approximately 59% of the region. Forests are in dark green, woodlands in a medium shade of green, grasslands in yellow-orange, bogs and marshes in bright blue, riparian and bottomlands in light blue, and urban and working areas in gray, or working lands in gray. Our region's unique floristic composition significantly affects the annual sequestration potential, total storage, and susceptibility to climate change related impacts such as drought, wildfires, and non-native species invasions. These all in turn affect the suite of natural climate solutions that may be effective or possible. As such, this chapter focused on the following natural climate solutions: land use change, carbon/climate farming, blue carbon, urban forestry, tree planting and wildlands, non-forest management, and fire management. There are numerous high-level key takeaways from this analysis. It is important to state that these are the technical findings from UC San Diego and other contractors and do not represent recommendations to or from the county. The first takeaway from this analysis is that the region has a large amount of biodiverse lands that are naturally adept at sequestering and storing carbon dioxide. Therefore, an inexpensive and effective natural climate solution is preventing land use change from natural and working lands to developed lands. This map shows the estimated annual sequestration in natural, working, and urban lands in the San Diego region. The warmer colors show higher rates of sequestration, with red being the highest, and cooler colors show lower rates of sequestration, with blue being the lowest. Sequestration values were taken from the literature, and the most geographically specific values were taken when possible. 2021 vegetation classification shapefiles were used from SANGIS. In this study, sequestration means the annual accumulation of carbon dioxide through photosynthesis and other chemical processes that results in the carbon dioxide becoming part of the plant's tissue or a molecule in the soil. This is sometimes referred to as the flow of carbon dioxide in an ecosystem. Sequestration is a rate and is most commonly measured in carbon dioxide equivalent per unit of area per year. This map shows the total estimated carbon storage in the region. As with the previous map, warmer colors show larger amounts of storage, with red being the highest, and cooler colors show lower amounts of storage, with blue being the lowest. Carbon storage values were taken from the literature, and again, the most geographically specific values were taken when possible. This map also used the 2021 vegetation classification shapefiles from SANGIS. Here, storage means the total accumulated carbon dioxide that is held in dead and living plant and fungal tissues, bacterial cells, and in soils. Carbon storage is sometimes referred to as carbon stocks, sinks, or pools. Carbon storage is a volume and is most commonly measured in carbon dioxide equivalent per unit of area. There are a few critical points where future data can be integrated into the natural climate solutions framework. There are numerous studies currently underway in the region that can help address some of these points, including work being done by local universities, jurisdictions, nonprofits, and agencies. First, these maps utilized the best available data from the literature and may not reflect on-the-ground values as precisely as local data would, because some of these values were taken from studies at the state, national, or international scale. Given that both sequestration and storage values are known to vary temporally and spatially, in addition to varying by prevailing abiotic and biotic factors, local data will be the most accurate and precise and should be used preferentially as they become available. Second, these regional maps lack local eelgrass, geospatial, and carbon value data, though these were partially accounted for in the blue carbon section. Finally, neither map uniformly accounts for soil carbon values. Understanding soil carbon cycling under different conditions will be important to understanding ongoing carbon sequestration and storage, as well as the strength of the natural climate solutions available. Overall, these maps show that there is ample natural sequestration in natural and working lands, and that there are large, stable carbon stocks in the region. Thus, the first key takeaway is that protecting these lands from land use change is the most effective and least expensive natural climate solution for the region. The second takeaway is that regional working lands, which include croplands, rangelands, and orchards and other agricultural lands, can offer several unique natural climate solutions. This section of the chapter found that carbon farming practices can both reduce the annual emissions from agricultural lands and simultaneously sequester carbon dioxide. Before discussing agricultural and natural climate solutions, it is important to recognize that agricultural and working lands are a relatively small contributor to regional emissions. The 2021 SANDAG Regional Plan estimates of 2016 regional emissions found that agricultural and working lands only contributed approximately 0.4% of total regional emissions. So this section analyzed 3 natural climate solutions for working lands: on-farm composting, riparian restoration, and orchard tree retention. The carbon farming techniques that offered the strongest carbon sequestration potential was on-farm composting and composting on range and pasturelands. Additional agricultural sequestration can come from habitat restoration of riparian habitats and retaining orchard trees that would otherwise be lost due to rising input costs. These natural climate solutions on agricultural and working lands are important for this report for two primary reasons. First, agriculture is the only sector that can switch from being a net emitting sector to a net sequestering sector. Through various natural climate solutions and carbon farming techniques, agriculture can provide regional carbon sinks while also producing food and other agricultural products. Second, these natural climate solutions and others can provide important co-benefits to agricultural and working lands, as well as to natural and urban lands. These co-benefits may include, but are not limited to, fewer inputs onto agricultural lands, higher yields, improved water and air quality, improved and/or expanded natural habitat, and better soil water retention. The third takeaway is that there are numerous blue carbon habitats in the region that hold a significant amount of carbon. Blue carbon habitats are those habitats that are partially, fully, or tidally submerged in fresh or salt water. This report focused on marshes, wetlands, and salt and mudflats for the sea level rise analysis, though eelgrass and seagrass beds are also important blue carbon habitats and will be impacted by sea level rise. The San Diego region has several large bays, wetlands, marshes, and mudflats, though like much of the West Coast, the region has lost large portions of its historic blue carbon habitats to land use change and development. Some estimates suggest that as much as 69% of historic wetlands have been lost in the region. The remaining blue carbon habitats hold large, dense stores of carbon dioxide, making their protection, restoration, and expansion important for maintaining and improving their ability to store carbon. Additionally, the region's blue carbon habitats are uniquely susceptible to sea level rise. Thus, the associated natural climate solutions of protecting and restoring blue carbon habitats can have important carbon benefits. This map shows the extent of blue carbon habitats that will be impacted by 1 foot of sea level rise. Using estimates from the literature about sequestration and storage estimates per habitat type, 2021 SAN-GIS vegetation classification data, and sea level rise shapefiles from the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, this analysis estimated that approximately 782 hectares, or about 1,900 acres, will be affected by 1 foot of sea level rise. Under 1 foot of sea level rise, approximately 180,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent may be affected, some of which will be emitted as blue carbon habitats are inundated or lost. The most recent 2022 estimates from NOAA suggest that the southern West Coast region could experience 1 foot of sea level rise relative to the 2000 levels by mid-century. In addition to its carbon benefits, protecting and restoring blue carbon habitats will have significant co-benefits. Primary among them are the fact that blue carbon habitats provide ecosystem services that enhance coastal resilience because marshes and wetlands buffer coastal zones from storms and king tides, all while providing habitat to wildlife and cleaning the air and water. The fourth takeaway is that the urban, suburban, and other built-up areas in the region provide some carbon sequestration and storage benefits through their urban trees, urban forests, and urban greenery. By planting more trees, shrubs, and other plants in urban areas, those urban areas can provide a natural climate solution where virtually no other natural climate solutions are available. Recent estimates from the American Forests and the Nature Conservancy of California suggest that there is substantial sequestration and storage potential in the San Diego region through urban forestry and greening. Together, the estimates suggest that annual sequestration could increase by approximately 0.32 million metric tons per year. Such an expansion could also store an additional 6 million metric tons of carbon dioxide. Urban trees are important because they provide a natural climate solution in an urban area, which replaced natural vegetation, and offer one of the few opportunities to replace some of the lost sequestration and storage potential. Additionally, urban trees can offer significant co-benefits to communities through providing ecosystem services like shade, air quality improvements, and habitat for wildlife. These ecosystem services can help communities through cooling effects, decrease pollution, and more. It is important to note that the carbon benefits and co-benefits of urban forestry are highly dependent on species selection because different species have different input and maintenance requirements, longevities, and growth habits. Final takeaway is that there are numerous other natural climate solutions that may be important for carbon sequestration, as well as for social, economic, and environmental reasons. The following three were discussed, but were not quantified, in part due to few available data sources and studies. First was tree planting and maintenance in public non-urban areas. Ongoing efforts to protect existing trees and plant new trees are occurring on public lands at the local, state, and federal level. These focus on native species, which provide more co-benefits and potentially more carbon benefits because of their natural adaptations. Second, non-forest management. This refers to land management of any habitat type that is not a forest. The San Diego region is scrub dominated, so most of the land area would fall under this management type. Some techniques that could be natural climate solutions are non-native invasive grass and forb management, as well as scrub management to promote biodiversity and native species growth. Finally, fire management is an important natural climate solution and overlaps some of the non-forest management. Among the fire management tools for chaparral and scrub systems are preventing human-caused ignition and reducing fuel loads through non-native invasive species management, education campaigns and research, and practices like creating defensible space around homes and structures, as well as around roads and highways, so accidental sparks near buildings and roads do not start fires. This is also known as infrastructure hardening. Also, each of these natural climate solutions produce important co-benefits for the region, like providing habitat for native species, promoting regional biodiversity, improving air quality, and supporting ecological resilience, to name a few. Finally, there are several high-level key conclusions from this chapter. First, the San Diego region has several large stores of carbon and sequesters significant amounts of carbon annually. Though this analysis shows a regional perspective that is not meant to inform specific projects or granular natural climate solution discussions, it nevertheless demonstrates that there is ongoing sequestration and that there are large, stable carbon stocks in the region. Second, this analysis, as well as land use and land management decisions in the region, would benefit from more data on local carbon cycling and regional ecosystem responses to management, restoration, and climate change. Third, equity and environmental justice should inform decisions about natural climate solutions so that communities of concern directly benefit from regional land use, restoration, and urban greening decisions. Finally, co-benefits can be quantified and utilized to better understand the trade-offs associated with land use policies, carbon farming techniques, and other regional decision-making. All natural climate solutions have co-benefits, and understanding these can better inform decision-making. That concludes our presentation, and Murtaza, the other LUJ staff, Emily Leslie of Montara Mountain Energy, and I are happy to take your questions. Thank you.
All right, Elise, thank you again for an extensive and informative presentation. Thank you very much. Don't go far away, and we have some questions bubbling up here. So good, we want to spend the rest of our time hearing from all of you. We have some questions we do want to pose. We'd like to get your input on your responses to a couple specific questions, but largely we want to hear your kind of thoughts and comments and ideas and be able to respond to any of your questions that we can today. But again, just as a quick reminder, best ways to do that, again, through the chat. It's great for us. We can kind of track things nicely there in the chat, and all of us can see each other's comments and questions and thoughts. But you're also welcome to use the Zoom raise hand feature. And we're happy to unmute you if you'd like to speak over the audio for everyone. So we'll be able to control that, make sure we're not talking over each other as that sometimes happens. And again, for those of you who might be on a mobile device, maybe on a tablet, this is what that will look like for you. So before I get to, I do have a couple questions I'd like to, like I said, I'd like to pose to you all, but I do want to ask Elise and possibly Emily if you'd be prepared. There's a couple questions that came in over the chat that I'd love to start off, have you answering if you could, and then we'll get into a couple of our polling questions that we have for the group. The first is from Craig, who's asking for a clarification if you could define blue carbon. I think you spoke to it in the slides, I know you did. But then a second question from B asks about the types of tools and protocols being used to quantify carbon sequestration. And again, I know you covered that to some extent, Elise, but so two key questions. Maybe Elise, we can start with you, and then Emily, if you want to jump in. But so can you help again recap defining blue carbon, and then what's tools and protocols to quantify carbon sequestration? There you go.
Yeah, so blue carbon in our region is pretty focused on wetlands, marshes, salt and mud flats, and eelgrass and seagrass beds. But globally, mangroves are also really important. We just don't have mangroves here. And then as far as tools for understanding sequestration and storage, I'm not as familiar with the scientific protocols, but I know soil sampling is really important, and then just sampling the plant communities in and around in different habitats is how it's done. And I know that there are several ongoing studies right now to quantify chaparral, local chaparral sequestration and storage. And as I mentioned, there's a lot of variability within habitats. So getting those local data will be really helpful for understanding what's happening in our region specifically.
Great, thank you. Emily, anything else to add to that, particularly about tools and protocols used to quantify carbon sequestration? Or if we can wait, folks. Yeah, go ahead.
Elise covered it pretty well, and I think if people are really interested in digging into the methods, I would point them to Appendix 5A, which has, sorry, I'm scrolling back up to read the title, Methods, Data, and Sources for Carbon Stock and Flow Data. So that's on page 202 of the RDF. So
excellent, good.
Pretty
Thank you very
detailed
much.
Documentation there.
All right, excellent. So good. We are definitely going to now move. First thing I want to do in just a couple minutes, Craig Jones, we're going to come to you over audio. So thank you for queuing up your hand there. But before we come to you, Craig, I do want to now pose a first question to all of you. In a moment, we're going to pop up the Zoom poll tool. I know many of you are familiar with that. This is just a tool we like to use just to kind of take the pulse of the group who's in the room, as it goes. Not a scientific poll, but you see the questions, and forgive the long questions, long answers here, but we just want to get a sense about the key takeaways that you just heard from Elise here. Which is your top priority? And again, granted, we're asking you to pick one. We suggest they all seem to be emerging critical takeaways, and not to leave any of them behind by just choosing one, but we just want to kind of get a sense from you about whether it's protecting existing carbon pools, reforestation, climate farming, as it's described here, protecting wetlands, the blue carbon ecosystems, the urban tree canopy, reducing wildfire risk, and other. If there's other, not in this list, we don't want to be too limiting here. If there's other things that you feel are important, definitely continue to tell us in the chat. We'd like to hear more from you about that. So, okay, with that, I think we can launch the poll tool. This just takes about less than a minute, just a minute here. So weigh in here. If you had to pick the one here for now as a top priority, as defined as these key takeaways, we talk about land use and natural solutions. All right, good. Keep it coming. All right, just over half of you now. I'll give you about a 15-second warning, and then we'll close it out, and then we'll open up to hear from all of you more closely. All right. That's a pretty good, almost about 2/3 of you weighed in. So why don't we just take a look? We'll end the poll and just show the results here for all of us to take a quick look. So yeah, a lot of you weighing in, feeling that protecting the existing carbon pools, for releasing stored sinks of CO2, right, that we have. Climate farming, changing agricultural lands into from sources into sinks and to manage ag methane emissions. Important to all of you. Reforestation, the tree canopy, wildfire risks, other as well. Thank you for indicating other and telling us more in the chat. So good, absolutely, and happy to hear from all of you about how you would interpret or articulate or change a takeaway as it may be. And again, just want to emphasize these are takeaways from the research, not kind of a policy direction at this point or making a choice at this moment. This is about what the research is telling us at this point to start informing conversations. So good. With that, good. I appreciate the comments starting to come in. And let's take a look at those. But in the meantime, Craig has been waiting patiently. He wanted to speak over the audio. Thank you, Craig. Craig, you should be able to unmute yourself. Go ahead. What are your thoughts you wanted to share?
Thank you so much. I really appreciate. I'm so gratified that this session today has highlighted the clear and obvious recommendations from the Objective UCSD study. In this first poll, I chose other because I thought A wasn't quite clear enough. Maybe A is a little bit diplomatically stated, but what it means is we need to keep urban, suburban development out of county unincorporated lands. At last week's, I think it was last week or week before's county session on sustainable land use framework planning, it was suggested that transfer of development rights can be used to do this. That can be done within county lands only, or even between the county and other jurisdictions. It's a way of using market forces to make sure that development goes where it should be. So I'd like to see the county specifically address transfer of development rights and all of its potential. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Craig. And I recall that earlier comment you had in the chat early on about TDRs. Thank you for sharing that and offering that as a potential solution. And let me just dovetailing off of Craig's comments again. These are takeaways from research, right? So now, yeah, we do start to now think about what do these takeaways tell us about potential policy directions that you would suggest our region needs to pursue. And I think it's safe to say, the county, while sponsoring this effort, also, again, I think as many of you heard, this is intended to be highly collaborative across all jurisdictions. So I know that welcome to hear directive county policy, welcome to hear that, but also want to hear from you about what more broadly do many other jurisdictions you think are going to be important for them as well. So good. All right, let's go to, I want to just acknowledge more comments coming in the chat in a moment. Mike, we're going to open up to hear from you, but also wanted to know, some other folks mentioning, again, the concern around development in unincorporated areas, sprawl development, keeping in mobility hubs. So suggestion, Ellie, thank you around the language, how we might take takeaway item C into something a little bit different, how we might reframe that. That's helpful to think about as things continue to evolve here. And I also want to thank Emily for providing some responses in the chat. A lot of good dialogue happening there. So, more comments about ag as a key carbon sink, that we're not preventing that. Some people feel strongly about that. So thank you. Yeah, please keep those coming. And then now let's come back to the audio. Mike Bullock. Mike, good to see you again. Thanks for being here. And then we'll go to Bill. And forgive me, Pooja Batra, forgive me for any mispronunciation on my part. Mike, go ahead. You should be able to unmute.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I took the title of today's discussion to be 2 parts, connected but separate. Land use and natural climate solutions. So I was most interested in the land use part of it, but we just heard a fantastic presentation, but it wasn't about land use. Land use to me is about zoning and how we use the land that we use, land use. The presentation was really good, and it was about natural climate solutions, and that's something I need to learn a lot about, and that was, I took notes, and that was great. But my first comment really is about the way you start these meetings, and I appreciate that very much. The Kumeyaay and the other tribes here, and making those statements are important to get our feet on the ground, so to speak. But I'll tell you what your not saying, and you should say, at every single one of these meetings. And that is that human survival requires climate stabilization, and we are on a path to destabilize the climate. Just April 5th, and by golly, it made the front page. And you know, it sounds like a joke from that movie, Don't Look Up. It made the front page that we are firmly on a path to an unlivable climate. Now, granted, it wasn't the big headline because it just means we're going extinct. That, you know, maybe it's not that big a story, but it did make the front page below the fold. And actually, that's been in the newspaper probably for 10 years, but it's not that big a deal, I guess. And that's very odd to me. And so this process could fix that a little bit by starting at the beginning, not just by respecting indigenous people and the fact that we stole their land and committed worse than a war crime. I mean, we tried to wipe them out. I mean, there's a genocide, that's the name. So that's good that you say that. But also, we are a kind of, it's a self-induced genocide, you might say, environmental genocide. We're in that process. Very little chance we'll get off that path because it's 2030. That's why it's a code red climate emergency. And that is worth stating because that's what we're about here. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to talk about land use, but I think I've said enough. So I appreciate the time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate that. And yeah, I appreciate your being flexible here and opening up for others to be able to chat as well. But, you know, Mike, after we get through a series of hearing from folks, feel free to come back if you'd like to expand a bit. And I want to give a heads up too to others that I want to introduce in a few minutes, I want to introduce another polling question about kind of a little bit more on the implementation side. We want to spur more input and thoughts from you about kind of next steps. So stay tuned for that momentarily. The other housekeeping item before I ask Bill to come on to share over audio is that for those of you who may be listening in by phone, feel free to let us know if you'd like to speak over audio, or you know, if it's difficult for you in any such way. Feel free to just note in the chat if you can, just sending a comment in the chat saying that you'd like to speak over audio, and we can unmute you and bring you on that way too. So just in case anyone's got kind of limited connectivity, just let us know. So very good. All right, Bill Tippett, you should be able to unmute here. What are your thoughts here about some of the takeaways and what's resonating for you?
Yeah, thanks. And I appreciate this. This session is close to my heart, and I'm sure many others around here. I put a couple things in the chat box already. Recently, the IPCC came out with a whole list of mitigation measures to reduce carbon emissions, and it was, you know, a global list, and there are state lists and everything else. But I think what we really need to focus on is that San Diego is a bit different from a lot of places, and so if we see a list here, a list there, you know, we should resist the urge to just pull it off and say this is what we need to do. So I'm glad this analysis is coming out the way it is. However, many of us who are on these calls know a lot of details about what actually happens in San Diego County. And for instance, just the issue of the use, retaining land. You know, we're constantly fighting the issue just to protect what we have. And since it is a huge carbon sink, you know, everything we can do to reduce the impacts to the natural habitat and leave it the way it is great. But much of that is out, you know, the other cities have to control that too. But going to, say, coastal wetlands, it's a great bit of information in the report. And if sea level rise does rise like it's expected to, which it will probably actually exceeding that, you know, we're going to lose a lot of carbon sequestration. And there is no affirmative commitment by any entity that I can see that really would basically take lands that could be used for transition to coastal wetlands to actually commit to doing that. For instance, the Port of San Diego's Port Master Plan, which is a 50-year plan, doesn't really do anything to identify where within the San Diego Bay, which has lost between 60 and 99% of its coastal wetlands, where a substantial amount of coastal wetlands would be created. So, it's a net loss. Other of the coastal lagoons are pinned up against either very steep canyon walls or against development. So I applaud the idea of using coastal wetlands for helping to address carbon sequestration, but the reality is what? So as part of this document, it'd really be helpful for it to not only identify potential options, but also really be clear about the current impediments. Because otherwise it's not a highly useful document unless you really drill down and say, and here are the actual impediments to getting this done. I think the rest of us can help work on reducing some of those impediments maybe.
Very good. All right, Bill, thank you very much. Appreciate your thoughts there. And I know the team is wants to be very thoughtful about that. Well, encourage all of you to continue to share those specific ideas about, highlighting impediments to make sure aren't lost in the research and the takeaways as we bring this further forward for discussion. So thank you. So as I promised, I'd like to hear from Pooja Batra, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it all. And then after Pooja, we'll have another quick poll. We'd like to hear from you, and then we'll hear from, I believe it's Mora Saldana. So again, forgive me for mispronunciations. Pooja Batra, you should be able to unmute yourself now to talk over the audio. Pooja?
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, this is Pooja Batra from Batra Ecological Strategies. Thank you for your presentation. A few years ago, I did a bit of a back of the envelope calculation as a kind of opportunity analysis about agriculture. And I did that in conjunction with the Food System Alliance and the Farm Bureau. And we concluded, and that was in 2018, I believe, we concluded, similar things that, avoided loss of our carbon sequestering orchards is really key, and that compost application, not just on our croplands, but on rangelands, has a massive potential to sequester carbon for many decades in the future. And there's a lot of data accumulating on that. And we also looked at riparian restoration and the potential for that. So it sounds like, your conclusions were quite consistent. I'm a little bit, I guess my question is around the conclusion that more research is needed to get really quantitative estimates. So my question is, given that we know qualitatively and we can do some back of the envelope calculations on the potential, and given that this is the, past the 11th hour now, do we actually, is the intent here to get more and more numbers? Because if this regional decarbonization framework is a different process than the CAP, I understand the CAP needs, very, strong numerical estimates, but if this is a different process, then we know enough to get started and put some policy measures in place. And, we did make some recommendations in that white paper that we did regarding what are the barriers, what are the reasons for that loss. So I'm just wondering how quantitative do we need to be at this point, given that this isn't part of the CAP?
Pooja, thank you very much. I'd like to ask Murtaza Baksamusa to come on. I think many of you know Murtaza. Murtaza, if you don't mind providing yourself a brief self-introduction and maybe any initial response you can to Pooja's question. And if you feel the need, want to bring on others to help answer that question further. What are your thoughts, Murtaza?
Thank you, Pooja, for your observation and as well as the research that you put into this, because you're right. We know that there is what the problems are, and potentially we also know where the constraints are. As a region, what this project was trying to do is establish a baseline for us to begin the conversation on implementation. We are now at a place, it was a pretty time constrained process between July and now. Given the intersectoral analysis that we did, we have what we need. We know the scale of the problem that is ahead of us. In terms of the draft reports that are out there, the comment period is until the end of May, but we're not waiting. We're beginning to start the pathways on implementation. So this is where it is different from CAP process. It is intended to be overlaid on all CAP processes in the region. And it is intended to figure out where it is that we can fill the gaps that we don't get from any other process through our own jurisdictional work. So therefore, we are done with the studies, at least for the baseline. Now we got to look at the solution. So this is a very good time to ask the question, and this is a good time to begin putting solutions and ideas together so that we can with a collaborative process,
Right.
chart out what those implementation pathways are for the region.
Very good. And to spur that discussion forward, I've introduced a new question here. Hopefully you're all kind of seeing it on screen, and I'll briefly step through it, and we'll open up the polling tool in just a moment. And B. Alvarez will come to you in just a couple minutes over audio. Thank you for raising your hand. But so dovetailing off of Murtaza's response to Pooja's question, we want to kind of spur some discussion among all of you about more thoughts about next steps. What can and should implementation look like overall? So what are you most interested in? And again, kind of challenging you here with this poll, we're just choosing one of these. We're not suggesting that only one of these should happen, and we're trying to pick the best one. But just again, taking the pulse of the team, everybody who's here today, you know, what really rises to the top for you as a starting point overall. So again, increasing the availability of high quality scientific data, purchasing land for permanent conservation, education and training on increasing sequestration among private landowners, carbon farmer certification programs for farmers, incentives for farmers and landowners to adopt sequestration practices, fostering more collaborative land management practices, centering equity and environmental justice in future land use and management decisions, and of course, more. We know there are more options out there. So let's go ahead and launch the poll tool, and we'll just to check in with all of you, which of these would you have as your starting point among a multi-pronged approach for moving forward? Good. I see them coming in here. We'll just take a minute to collect your responses, and then we'll come back to hear from all of you in more detail. So again, as your choices are coming in, I just want to thank you, all of you, for just really robust, great discussion in the chat, sharing information with each other, thoughts and ideas. Know that we are capturing and kind of downloading those comments and ideas as you bring them in and making them part of our records. We get a lot of redundancies happening right now with our recordings, so I want to make sure we're not losing those details. All right, very good. So let me give you a 10-second warning here. If you haven't registered a choice, please go ahead and do that. All right, about 2/3 of you have weighed in. So let's just take a look here. Go ahead and let's show the results. Team members. All right, so interesting. So kind of the incentives for farmers and landowners to adopt carbon sequestration processes, practices. But yeah, the purchasing land, also some of you that resonated with you as a maybe one initial starting point as well. So very good. I know somebody mentioned kind of all of the above in the chat, and totally understood. Absolutely. We not suggesting that only one thing should happen, but yeah, I wanted to just check in with you. All right, we'll stop sharing those results for now. Want to hear from you, and thank you. For example, Ellie in the chat, implementation should happen in a flexible and experimental type of space, not overly bureaucratic. Very good. So we can really think about and test out impactful solutions and continue to kind of iterate and change. And as data evolves, as practices change and ideas come forward, we want to have that flexibility. Thank you, Ellie, for that sentiment. Appreciate that. So all of you, please do keep them coming. So B. Alvarez has been waiting patiently. B, you should be able to unmute now. Go ahead, B.
No, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I think that in the chat has been a lot of really good comments. And one thing that I wanted to echo is the in-depth report that has been done by BATRA and supported with the San Diego Food System Alliance, and linking the climate-friendly farming practices to San Diego Climate Action Plan, And I feel like in this report, or at least in the draft of the decarbonization plan, we are missing having healthy topsoil as a critical green infrastructure. And I think that we deserve to have more attention to that than is given in the current draft. We know that in San Diego needs to invest in our local food system as a key sector in the fight against climate change, and our farmers can help mitigate our significant carbon footprint and get us to net zero faster, while simultaneously producing healthier, fresh food. And this decarbonization strategy doubles in carbon farming and makes an excellent start, but it is essential that it become a more central strategy and the right investment are made now. We know that the different practices that farmers are already doing in the county. We like to see also incentives for ongoing practices. Some of the issues that farmers have right now is that some of the conservation practices that can, give you grant money to apply these practices for carbon farming and carbon sequestration are only for new implementation. So we would like to see an ongoing incentive for these farmers that have been doing these practices for many years, and also make the distinction about the incentives for landowners when we have a lot of farms in the county that are leasing land and they don't own the land, but still producing healthy food and still having all these carbon farming practices for many years to now. So maybe, the idea is to create this strategy that will support the ongoing practices, that will support new farmers tapping into having carbon farming as their regular practices in their operations, and providing opportunities for farmer-led research and accounting for their contribution in sequestering greenhouse gas emissions will be very important too.
Very good. Thank you, Vi. Appreciate that. I I'm hearing a lot of kind of layered multi-benefit solutions that you just mentioned here, which we really appreciate. Obviously, we're focused here on decarbonization, but virtually any and all solutions, all of us would hope to see and want to see co-benefits that support local small business farmers, for example, communities, economic change, environmental justice and equity. The list goes on and on. So appreciate the thoughtful consideration here about what specific solutions can do for broader benefits. So thank you, Vi, for that. And seeing more coming in the chat. Thank you all for that. If you haven't taken a look at the chat, please do take a look. So wonderful. With that, let's see. I see in terms of raised hands here, Craig, want to come back on. Yeah, go ahead, Craig. What further thoughts on kind of next steps you want to put into the mix here?
Yeah, thank you. Again, the county staff may be a little bit too diplomatic in this set of questions too. I don't see explicitly anything in here, land use planning and zoning to limit sprawl development, to put development where it should be. If you read F, maybe very, very, very broadly, you might get that, but I encourage the county here to be more explicit in implementing what the UCSD study says. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, Craig. Appreciate that. And we welcome any and all of you, whether it's on any of these and other potential next steps, how you would interpret them and what you would suggest would be more specific implementation steps, maybe potential policy language, for example, or direction that you'd like one or more jurisdictions to pursue and seek out. So very good. Great. Yeah, let's see. Let's back here to the, let's see, Mike, I see you coming back here. Yeah, go ahead, Mike. You should be able to unmute. What thoughts you have about next steps? What's resonating for you?
Next steps. A lot about next steps should be driven by our climate stabilization requirement and the fact that it's 2030. It's not 2050, it's not later. And so we are pushed to do things which will do the most in the least amount of time. I mean, we need to maximize short-term advantages And that would be obvious if you put that 2030 number in there and the actual requirement. I'm a requirements engineer, so I kind of put things in that way. Now, also, I'm going to go back to the actual title of this session. It's Land Use and Natural Climate Solutions. I think the way it should have been entitled, perhaps was Land Use to Achieve Natural Climate Solutions, because it seems like that was the presentation was about land use to achieve the solutions, reductions. But that's the title is Land Use, and as if it's these two different things. So I'm going to go back to land use, and I'm going to ask people that they envision something in their mind's eye, and that because this has to do with land use. And I want you to envision Walmart from a bird's eye view. Walmart. What you'll notice when you do that is that most of what you're looking at is actually car parking. It's mostly asphalt. And I've heard that old joke that's really the best thing we can do for the environment is put asphalt everywhere because it seals in all the nutrients. That's not true. That's a joke. But really, we've paved so much pavement, so much land to accommodate automobiles. And then we make people pay for that in ways where they have no choice whatsoever. So that all has to do with land use. That has to do with why there's so much asphalt, which is actually not good for the environment. I could say more about parking because it is about land use in a very, very big way. And it was proposed by the plaintiff 9 years ago when they sued the county over the climate action plan. And you never mentioned that, and it doesn't seem like you're the people that are working on this regional decarbonization framework. They don't know what happened. What was proposed? What was proposed was extremely valuable. Now I want to read a real short note from Keith Jones. He is the owner of Ace Parking. And he and I had a long discussion, and he's open to change, unlike the government. Most of the people in government talk about change a lot. They love to do big, long studies and so on and so forth. But when it comes down to actually doing something which is different, not where the private sector is. The private sector is the only thing that can bail us out, actually, but the government needs to facilitate that. So Keith Jones says, happy Friday to you. Thank you for your thoughtful and well-crafted response. This is, by the way, March 11th. He says, yes. I mean, you may wonder if I'm allowed to use his message to me, email, but that's exactly what I asked him. Could I? He says, yes, please feel free to share ACE's interest in participating in an opportunity to provide these parking solutions. Great. What parking solutions? The ones that we talked about for an hour or more, I mean, and was presented to the county and is the thing that the county evidently has no interest in. You seem to just like acres and acres of free parking and free parking forever, let's don't change anything. But in the private sector, even though now Keith Jones has a nice business, making tons of money, but he's a pretty decent human being and he would like to see humans survive, and he's willing to change his business because he understands where we are in history and this threat to our existence. And he can help, and he can have he will provide a car parking system that will reduce driving. Now you might think, oh, Ace Parking, they love people driving. No, he wants to have a good product. He wants to be at the forefront. He wants to reinvent his business, and he's ready to go. Right. But Oceanside's not ready to go. San Diego's not ready to go. The county's not ready to go. Government likes the status quo. Right. And so think about that and think about changing and helping the private sector provide new solutions. We have good technology and we could do it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it. And by all means, I just want to appreciate you engaging with the private sector in this comment and I'm sorry, in this topic. And I think as I would imagine virtually all of you would agree it's going to take not just public agencies, government policy, but it's going to change. It's going to take change in business practices and such to help make many of these strategies that we know are going to be critical to really make effective decarbonization work. So any and all opportunities any of you have to engage the private sector in this process and to bring to, come to the table figuratively and literally, we welcome and encourage that. So thank you, Mike, for doing that and reaching out in that way and sharing, that feedback that he was provided. And I appreciate that he allowed you to do that. So thank you for that. Also want to thank, again, a lot of great commentary coming into the chat here as well. Really want to encourage you to continue to do that. And just a time check, part of my job is make sure we're staying on time. We have reserved to go as late as 4 p.m. this afternoon, so we're available to do that. At the same time, we want to respect your time, and we will, we want to continue to receive and hear your comments and questions as they come in here. I also want to let you know too that, don't feel like you have to get every question typed in or over audio during this session only. We do have ways for you to stay in touch. I think many of you are familiar, and we'll put in the chat in just a few minutes as a reminder, but the project webpage, of course, and there's some links to some new ways to engage, closely with the project, providing more input, sharing data sources that you have, which many of you have been doing today. And also, the good old fashioned email address, which is there right now in the chat, to be able to stay in touch with the project team and asking questions about, the process, the data that's coming forward. They're as responsive as they possibly can at all times. So please do use those tools as well. So for now, though, in terms of our remaining time, please do, if you have additional comments or questions, please don't wait for later in the meeting, I'll put it in. Please do share those now overall. But I do want to reflect on a couple things. For example, there's a question from, let's see, I think Murtaza, I'd like to, if you could come on to help out a little bit on trying to answer maybe a couple specific questions that have come in as of late here. And I was honing in on a question from Charlie in the chat, where he's noted the county's purchases hundreds of acres of land for park species conservation every year. And then will there be any new designation for sequestration? And how is that managed or led? Do we have any kind of answers for that right now, or at minimum, is that something we can take back and explore?
I think it's like I'll partly answer it and then take back and explore. What I think is being referred to is like the PACE program and the MSCP. And in addition, we have our Department of Parks and Rec that is leading a significant acquisition effort. There are some inherent policy questions here. For example, in terms of the question was about land designation. And I think it's probably got to do with how, in what way we're going to maintain the recording of the deeds. This is a question that is a policy question that will have to be addressed by our supervisors. And some of these, if to the extent that they can be addressed in collaboration, like with the private conservancies, we can have those discussions at the implementation pathways table. So it's worth kind of putting a pin in it and coming back to it when we begin this.
Okay. And Mers, if I could, while we have you, another question came from Pamela Nelson. Forgive me, this may have been part of what you were just responding to, but she was asking about management of the lands as being really important. And are there types of management according to the importance and sensitivity of the parcels conserved? So I'm not sure if that's.
Yeah, this is once again a question. It's a policy question. We can come back to you on this. In terms of whether it's a conservation and which ones and how do we manage, for example, the MSCP lands, we'll have to get back to you on that from our department.
Thank you, Murtaza, for that. So I was mentioning the questions from Charlie and Pamela specifically to that end, but as Murtaza said, but I want to encourage all, not just Charlie and Pamela, but all of you who may kind of have these questions yourselves. I mean, at this point, we'd love to hear from you as well about your suggestions of more specifically what to explore, for example, with these questions and what you'd like the county, other jurisdictions, other partners to think about more closely, to study, analyze, and try and organize around in terms of implementation steps. So So thank you all for those really insightful
Yeah.
questions.
I also wanted to acknowledge Maria's suggestion that might have gotten lost there in the chat from the city of San Diego. And if you want, Maria, you can come on and suggest it, but I thought it was a good suggestion. Basically, sorry, I'm pulling it up. The City of San Diego Sustainability and Mobility Department is interested in investigating a regional carbon market that is based on greater accountability and life cycle analysis. This is a great suggestion. There are so many that are coming in. What we need to do is have these discussions. I did this, it's my omission. I should have acknowledged the agencies that are here. San Diego Association of San Diego Association of Governments sent us a couple of representatives, Air Pollution Control District, cities, San Diego, Solana Beach, Carlsbad, and of course there's county staff here. So thank you for participating and for sending us suggestions. This is going to be both the public and the private sector working together. So really appreciate your participation.
Yeah, thank you, Mirza, for acknowledging it. Yes, thank all of you for being here, the public agencies, but all of you for all the contributions. And it's a good example of, because there have been questions about how, we talked about collaboration, regional collaboration around this effort and what that's looking like. And that is emerging. It's starting to happen with not just agencies attending these sector workshops, but more closer agency to agency collaboration that is occurring, is being organized and formalized. So, so stay tuned for more input on when and where that's happening. There'll be some upcoming events related to that. And I'm gonna share, before we wrap up today, we'll talk more about what that will look like in the sense of timeframes and project schedules. So, so good. I see in a moment, we'll come back to Craig here over the audio. I do want to encourage everybody here, again, just being thoughtful of everyone's time. Getting close to calling a last call on comments and questions. If you have them, please provide them to us now, if you can, because we want to make sure we get them all in before we wrap up and we kind of don't leave anybody behind who wants to get in for today. But as noted, and it's given in the chat, there are a lot of ways to continue to stay connected and engaged as well. So, all right, Craig, thanks again. You should be able to unmute. Go ahead. What else did you want to offer here?
Thank you. I appreciate the use of time here. Some of the creative solutions and really effective solutions that might help us here could require changes in state law, state planning and land use law, and even CEQA. Is the county open to pushing forward suggested changes in state law so that we can achieve the goals that we need to achieve?
Is the county open or available to kind of, if you will, pushing upwards to state level law? Is that, Craig, that was your, right? Yeah, Mirza, maybe you can kind of chime in, if or how kind of efforts related to state policies and what role does the county play in terms of informing existing or future state policy in these areas?
Okay, so the first is the analysis, which is basically assuming where the pathway is for a state in terms of where the state is. So it is not automatically assuming certain a progression in policy at the state and federal level. Now, from there, we build into a regional question. First we need to think about local jurisdictions, and part of it is kind of the frustration I saw that Craig was mentioning regarding land use zoning. So Scott Anderson, his analysis has done a considerable, expansive analysis of authority. Between these two, between state and local, there is a gap, and that is where the regional question comes into play. So we're thinking that there is a lot that cities can do. There's more that jurisdictions can do. We're thinking that there will be more state mandates coming, and even with those, we won't be able to reach our emissions. So that's where kind of we see some of these pathways happening.
Okay, very good. Thank you, Murtaza. Also wanted to know, while we have you, Murtaza, Pamela Nelson had another question. She wanted to try and have some clarification. So kind of zoning, this is probably specific to County of San Diego, excuse me, zoning. So off-road vehicle tracks as an accessory use in large-scale industrial, agriculture, and rural areas, that's something that can't be changed. And Murtaza, you may not have the immediate answer to that, but we can at least take that back as something to further clarify.
Yeah, as far as the unincorporated is concerned, that is really a planning and development services issue. We have staff here that can follow up on that.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Thank you, Pamela, for that question and clarifying that. I appreciate that. Excellent. So let me take just a moment here. Again, still, please have the questions, comments come in, but let me take one opportunity to give you some, kind of catch you up on next steps here as we are kind of looking at the latter part of our discussion with you. So just to orient you process-wise, right? Bigger picture, next steps in the coming months. So we're kind of here on the left, these sector workshops, as we're calling them, right? Here we are on April 14th on what we just abbreviated here, Land and Ag, as we briefly called it, just on the slide. Next week at 2 o'clock on April 21, we will focus on transportation as a sector. 2 weeks from now, April 28th, on buildings, and then 3 weeks from now on May 5 on jobs. So as you're now, many of you who've attended many of these know this, again, we took a deep dive today on land use and natural climate solutions. We will take deep dives on those respective topics on those dates. But also the kind of schedule-wise, the most immediate next step is our second community meeting occurring on April 19. So Tuesday evening, April 19, please visit the website for more information on how to register for that, get the Zoom link. Just to let you know, what we're going to focus on there is a kind of a deeper dive on the local policy analysis that was conducted as part of this study. And so some of you've participated in previous meetings where we had some high-level findings. This meeting on April 19th, which again, we call more of a community-wide meeting, we'll dive deeper as to what went into that local policy analysis and what do those takeaways suggest, and then talk more. We want to hear more from the broader community about, preferences for what implementation might look like, what sort of direction. Kind of similar to the conversation we've been having now, the last half hour, 45 minutes about kind of moving forward. What might that look like from a local policy analysis perspective from the study that was done? So I want to just give you a heads up on that. Please do. You're, of course, encouraged to attend. Appreciate your help in getting the word out as well, too, by the way. Those of you who represent associations, organizations with your own networks, please help to push this information out. We greatly appreciate it. Don't be shy. Through your email list, your social media feeds. If you need more help from the RDF team in doing that and getting information to share, please send an email to Zero Carbon, as we provided there, and they'll be happy to help make sure you get whatever we can provide to help get the word out. So anyway, so that's community meetings and sector workshops. I want to also highlight again the speaker series, and those are under development in terms of generating more outside speakers from outside, ideally outside our region, right? Kind of national, international experts on some of these topics. You see the dates there through June and July. That they're targeting. So stay tuned for confirmation of those dates and speakers. But then looking ahead a little more into late summer, we're looking at what we're calling direct engagement meetings and presentations. That'll be more kind of one-on-one, group-to-group level, including with local jurisdictions, starting to engage more closely as to talking about what implementation steps may look like and what may be considered pursued either within each jurisdiction, if not more collaboratively. Pop-up community events, trying to get out to reach more of our fellow residents across the county, where they are at a farmer's market, at the grocery store, whatever that may be, just to connect and make sure they're aware of this effort and that we want to make sure everybody's aware of how to be involved and stay informed. And then looking further ahead into the late summer, the regional convenings for implementation, and this is really honing in on gathering public officials and stakeholders on those implementation pathways. So with all the research and data now, these takeaways, what does this mean now for truly trying to, establish some clear implementation pathways that perhaps can be moved forward and adopted and pursued by jurisdictions, and what that may look like. So just want to give you a kind of a catch you up on that in terms of schedule and what will be occurring. And again, thank you in advance for helping to keep the broad, again, everybody informed and aware and drawing them into this process. It's very much valued and appreciated. So with that, let me come back to, again, we'll again, watching our time here. Any last questions you want to ask the team here while we have a captive audience? Any last questions for the group? For Mirza, Elise, Emily, the rest of the team that we can answer. It looks like we've covered things well. I appreciate folks who've come back a few times. Mike, go ahead. Any kind of last quick questions, Mike? You should be able to unmute now. Mike, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick question. 1 week from today, we're going to talk about transportation. So my question is, are you going to talk about car parking policy at all? That's my question. Thank you.
Parking policy. Is parking policy part of the transportation research? Good question. Maybe starting with Mirza. Mirza, what's your the research approach on transportation? Is there kind of anything around parking policy analysis, or?
I will, if Elise is here, I'll turn it over to her.
Go ahead, Elise.
So parking was included in consideration both for reducing VMT and for EV, trying to encourage EV adoption and use. So for VMT, there were some considerations by the consultants about parking incentive structures and how to reduce VMT, like specifically through how we structure parking incentives, be that free parking or some other methods. And then also parking was considered for encouraging EV adoption. So more to come on that, and encourage you to come next week.
And I'm going to go ahead and predict that Mike will have the first blue hand up a week from today on that conversation. So in all seriousness, Mike, yeah, absolutely. Please, I know hopefully you can join us, and if not, of course, I know you know how to stay in touch and stay connected to staff. We'll look forward to diving into that and the broader aspects of transportation through that sector workshop. So very good. So again, here in the chat, the link to the project webpage, the email address to stay in touch with the RDF project team. And as we've shown here on screen, some of these upcoming dates, get on the webpage, more details on these dates, the links to access the Zoom RSVP and the Zoom link and all that fun stuff. So please do check that. Yes, and B, I see your comment that just came in. Absolutely, we are saving and recording all of these workshops. What we do, at least within a week, we try to take this recording of this meeting, we upload it to the project website for people to be able to view it there. We're also creating summary reports, just notations. I showed a few minutes ago, and I can try and bring it back. We've been taking notes today. Here it is, here. My colleagues behind the scenes have been taking notes here on this digital whiteboard. So I'm just scrolling out. I know you can't read it this second, but just to rest assured, we've gotten many ways that we've been capturing the comments and questions from all of you today. So we will absolutely be downloading and saving those and making those available to everybody, so through the project website. So B, thank you very much for asking the question and making sure we highlight that for everybody's benefit. So good. With that, I want to say thank you, all of you, again, for making the time. We know you're all busy and have a lot of competing demands here, and taking the time to hear an in-depth presentation. Again, I want to thank Elise and Emily for a lot of work behind the scenes to gather a lot of information, try and put it in the most concise but comprehensive presentation possible without going on too long, so that we can hear from all of you. Importantly, I appreciate we'd be able to open up the majority of our time to hear from all of you overall. So again, I want to thank them. Mirza also for helping to answer questions, and there are more county staff behind the scenes who've been helping to make this all come together and work, essentially. So it is so there's more to come, more progress to be made. We hope to see you again Tuesday evening. If you, again, please help share the word for everybody who wants to learn more about this. That'll be a higher level conversation kind of about local policy, explaining what RDF is. I think many of you now are pretty entrenched and know, but the audience for Tuesday is a little bit more broad, but you're welcome to attend. And again, a week from today, we'll have another sector workshop at 2 p.m. focused on the transportation sector. So with that, thank you very much again for being here and making the time. And we'll look forward to seeing you, hopefully, if not Tuesday night, maybe next Thursday afternoon, and we will pick it up from there. So thanks very much. Have a great afternoon, and looking into the weekend, have a good weekend. We'll see you soon. Bye, everybody. Thank you.